if you're getting a paper statement, as soon as you get it, you should review your statement.
Okay,
And the consumer is not liable for any unauthorized charges if they promptly report it after they're aware of the fraudulent transaction.
is there a cutoff period for reporting time?
Well, the companies are all a little bit different. So
Okay.
you have to read that disclosure, which is why you should look at your statement right away.
Okay,
And then you have to respond in the way that they tell you. So in the back of your statement or on the second page, there'll be an address of where you should send what's called a dispute. So you're disputing whatever charges that are not yours. And then, and you have to do it within that time period. If you're after that time period, there are some credit card companies that will still do the investigations. Some will not.
yes.
So you'll
Yes.
just have to be aware of that.
Is there, within the banks, is there someone, is there a position, and is it by phone, is it in person, is it by email? How do you go about notifying the institution that,
Right. So in the back of your statement, there'll be
Yeah.
all of that information. So, and most of the banks and credit card companies, they want that in writing. You
Okay.
can call and say that there's something amiss with your statement. And they can, put their own alert on your credit card or your debit card, whatever it is. But they need something in writing from you to say which transactions are the ones that you are disputing.
okay, okay,
And there'll be an address on the back of your statement, or if you should call them, there would be a phone number, like a fraud hotline number that you can call on the back of your statement for folks who will, or the staff from the banks or the credit card companies that can help you.
relationship that you have with the bank, with a financial institution, what is it? Is it a contract?
When you sign up for a credit card, for example, when you sign on the dotted line, you're agreeing to be bound by the terms of the agreement of that contract. And the agreement, I mean, it's small print, but there's no intent to hide any information from you. It's small because the regulations are so voluminous.
Yeah.
And I think like as I mentioned earlier, there is an abundance of consumer protection legislation that really safeguards the liability for the customer. So even if you fail to report it on a timely basis, your liability for fraudulent transactions is limited to a certain dollar amount. So, that's the kind of consumer protection capabilities that exist. And in many cases, if you're a good customer of the bank and you've done everything you can, they probably won't hit you with any liability. They will assume all of the loss. It's a cost of doing business for the financial institutions, and it's a big cost. It's credit card fraud, debit card fraud is a huge problem for our institutions.
What is a cashier's check?
It's a bank. It's a check issued by a bank, by a financial institution, so that there are good funds available in the account.
Okay,
That when you go to present that check, if you are the payee of the check,
yeah,
the check will be cashed.
okay. But these cashier's checks can be fraudulent.
They can be fraudulent.
Okay, so a scammer calls you and says, we're going to issue this cashier's check, we sent you the cashier's check, go to the bank, get the money out and send us from that cashier's check $300, $1,000, whatever it is that they want to receive, okay? So in that particular type of situation, who's responsible for the loss of the money that the consumer has now suffered as a result of sending that money forward to the scammer?
So generally what we find is that the consumer is liable for that. So in those cases where the consumer receives the fraudulent cashier's check, what looks like a cashier's check, bank tellers are pretty astute. So what they try, I've seen this, and I've been a bank teller. We tell the customers, well, that looks like a fake check. Especially if you have to deposit it and then take money out. you know that that's a fake check.
Okay,
So don't deposit it because you might be at loss for that. No matter what we say,
yeah, people do it anyway.
people do it anyway,
Yeah.
and in the end, we let them.
Mm-hmm,
If the check turns out to be fraudulent,
yes,
then we go back to the customer and say the bank is not taking a loss. You customer, please go after whoever sent you the check. And you know, when people come to the banks and they're looking, a lot of these scammers are asking for those cashier's checks. Send me a cashier's check. Don't send me a personal check.
mm-hmm,
Send me a cashier's check. When you go and ask the bank for the cashier's check, when they tell you that it's a scam, you should probably believe them.
You should probably believe them. Okay, all right.
You know, they're pretty up on a lot of these scams that are going on. And like you
Okay.
said, the scam has been around for a long
A
time.
long time.
Well, it doesn't apply exclusively to cashier's checks.
No, that's what I'm saying, yeah.
If I give you a check
Mhm.
and you deposit it in your account, and then my bank returns it to your bank because there's no money in your account,
Mhm.
then you assume the responsibility for that return item.
Yeah,
But beyond that, you know, we tell you to protect your card like you would cash.
mhm,
Unfortunately, if you are careless with your card and suffer a loss, the bank will still take the loss.
what other responsibilities are common?
That a lot of the banks have these fraud protection departments within their banks,
Mhm.
especially the larger ones. And so if you go on a trip, be sure to call the bank to let them know that you're going to be on a trip. This has happened to me. I go on a trip, I forget to call the bank, and then my credit card is refused in the
Refused,
state, and
yeah.
I'm truly using it. It's like, oh shoot, I forgot to tell the bank I was traveling.
Mhm.
So you know, there again, it's inconvenient,
Mm-hmm.
but the bank is doing that to protect the consumers.
All right.
Credit cards, debit cards, checks. If you're writing checks in another state, you know,
Even checks, yeah, personal checks.
right?
yeah.
Because they clear really fast these days.
Yeah,
So you want to be sure that you just let the bank know I'm going to be taking a trip from this date to this date, and then, you know, your charges will not be refused when you're trying to pay for your hotel or rent your car, you know, whatever at the restaurant. That's what happened to me. I was at the restaurant. It's like, oh, I have another credit card. Hopefully they're not as smart.
well, what happens in the case where you're sharing a credit card? You know, your daughter and mom are sharing a credit card. What do you know? And the daughter is going to school in Alabama.
Mhm.
Yeah, you report it. You let the bank know, because the bank is always scanning for unusual activity.
Mhm.
For example, my wife goes to Japan every May with her buddies, and I'm here, and we share a credit card. So
Mhm.
I let the bank know, my wife is in Japan, but I'm here, so don't be suspicious if you see activity in both areas.
Okay.
So as long as they know, and the banks will make a note of that.
Mm-hmm.
Mrs. Pei will be gone until May 31st
Mm-hmm.
in Japan.
Okay.
And so they'll know that, if there are transactions in Japan, it probably is made by her,
Mm-hmm.
and so they won't
Right.
stop the account.
Right.
Yeah. Information. Okay. So we know that scammers need information in order to be able to commit their frauds.
Mhm.
Okay. What is it that they need in order to be able to perpetrate a scam?
Unfortunately, there's such a broad spectrum of scams. If we're
Mhm.
talking about credit card fraud,
Okay. Let's start with that.
all you
Okay.
really need is you need the account number,
Mm-hmm.
you need the expiration date,
Mm-hmm.
and there's the security value on the back of the card,
Yeah.
3-digit security value.
Mhm.
With that information, you may be able to make online transactions.
Online transactions. Okay.
Now, there's other security information that's really encoded on the magnetic stripe of the card.
Mm-hmm.
So in the case of the Target breach, for
Mhm.
example, Target probably captured the full range of information on the back of the card.
Mm-hmm.
And so now, and what the crooks do is they sell this information
Mm-hmm.
on the internet, in the black market.
Yes.
So with that information, you can actually create a counterfeit card.
So you create so their intent is to create a counterfeit card, okay, and they use it for whatever purpose.
Right.
When they go and use it, if it's on the internet, then obviously there's no verification, let me see your driver's license or anything like that. How do they get away with it in the context of stepping up to a counter and using credit cards and, counterfeit credit cards and that kind of a venue?
Well, I mean, they have the account information.
Mm-hmm.
What's usually not in the information or not visible to the clerk
Mhm.
is a name.
Mm-hmm.
So they could actually take an existing card that they have
Mm-hmm.
and mask over on the encoded stripe all the information for your card. And the crook would, the merchant's clerk would not know that the account belonged to somebody else. The account information belonged to somebody else.
The account information, and it could be a different name.
It could be a different name.
Wow. So they could actually sign John Doe, and that's what's on the card. That's not really important.
Great.
It's that security on that magnetic code piece.
Right.
Okay.
Now, the good news is that the industry is biting a big bullet
Mm-hmm.
and converting their cards to chip.
Mm-hmm.
It's called EMV, stands for European MasterCard Visa.
Okay.
And this is an international standard
Mm-hmm.
formatting of the chip.
Mm-hmm.
And so the chip will be much more secure because the magnetic stripe can only hold 80 characters of information.
Oh, is that right?
The chip can hold considerably more.
Oh, I see.
And so there will be a bigger abundance of security measures with the chip,
Okay.
including a concept called tokenization, which means that every time you use your card, a unique account number is created, so that even if they were able to steal the information, that account number is only good for one use.
Huh.
So, we're trying to develop new technologies to combat credit card fraud,
Okay.
credit and debit card fraud.
Let's turn to the trip to Las Vegas. Okay. You go to Las Vegas, you have a good time, somebody lifts your credit card. What can you expect, and what should you be doing?
Well, if you know that your card's been stolen, you should report it right away.
Okay, so call
And-
the fraud unit at your institution or whoever the issuer
Right.
is, the
Right.
card, and notify them that you lost your card.
And the bank will stop the card right away.
Okay, so let's say there's a bunch of charges that were accrued during that 2-hour or 5-hour difference between the time the card was stolen and the time you noticed it. Okay, so now you've got these transactions that have occurred on your card in that intervening period. What happens in that particular circumstance?
Your liability is absolutely limited
Mhm.
to a few bucks, if at that.
Okay,
So as long as you report it promptly, you're safeguarded.
okay. So when you look at categories of the population, who would you say are the most vulnerable, that are being scammed, whose identity is being stolen, whose property is being sold off, and things like that? What are the segments of the population that are really vulnerable to that degree?
Well, what we have noticed is that the seniors are often targeted.
Okay.
Why? Because seniors typically have more money.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, seniors have more time too. So
Mhm.
if you want to engage somebody on the phone, a senior might be more willing to spend a few extra minutes with you on the telephone. They're also more trusting. So, and they typically have good credit histories and what have you. So their account information is worth more
Mm-hmm.
than somebody 20 years old or so forth.
All right, so what do you do, okay, to safeguard yourself as an elderly person, and what do you do as a relative that cares for the person and is worried about that. What do you do?
Right. I think we should point out that elderly is not really that old. So the.
Does that mean I'm included in that? Thanks a lot. I appreciate that. Okay.
So what we have in state law, what we recognize in state law is that it's anyone 62 years of age or older. So, it's really before retirement age too.
Mhm.
If you think of retirement age as 65 or 70,
Mm-hmm.
it's before that.
Okay.
So,
62.
Right.
Okay, so
That's
that is
one.
me.
And I should also say that crooks do not discriminate based on age.
Yeah, no, yeah, they
They'll
don't
catch
discriminate.
whatever they can
Right.
from anybody they can.
Okay,
Right.
okay, all right.
But
so-
they're looking for certain signals. So, one of the signal is that AARP sends out a lot of mail.
Yes,
And so, if they're culling through different mailboxes or they're watching mailboxes,
mm-hmm.
they can see who's getting that mail, and you're most likely in the right age group for them.
Okay,
And so, that's how
that's how it starts.
it starts.
Okay, and then what are some examples that you're aware of where elderly have in fact been impacted through scams or identity theft?
Well, one of the most common is sweepstakes and lotteries.
Really, that still works, huh?
It still works. You'll be surprised how well it works. So a resident is notified that they've won a sweepstakes. And all they have to do to collect their money is send in a check for $5,000, $10,000, whatever.
I mean, we were hit with that scam, 20 years ago?
I'll share an anecdote with you. The banks have gotten together and they're trying to educate our consumers and our customers. So they sent out this brochure, and this brochure resembles our TV ad, and on the headline says, "Congratulations, you've won a $100,000 sweepstakes."
Mm-hmm,
If you don't read beyond that,
mm-hmm.
you may think you've won a $100,000 sweepstake, but right on the bottom it asks the question: is this for real?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
the bank sent this out, and the day after they sent it out, there's a hotline number here that's being responded by the Better Business Bureau. The
Okay,
day after they sent these materials out, BBB was bombarded with telephone calls from
Really?
people who thought they had just won $100,000,
really?
having received a piece
For
of
sure.
material
Yeah,
like this.
Yeah, yeah. What's next in the queue?
Well, as Iris was mentioning, we're seeing a lot more of the caretaker fraud, where somebody has hired a caretaker or they've asked a family member to care for them.
Yes.
And the caretaker is taking advantage of the elderly.
Issue of trusts. What's your experience?
Well, when you set up a trust, one of those trust documents is typically a power of attorney.
Okay.
That, for example, my parents have given me power of attorney to act on their behalf for their financial transactions. But you should be very careful not to give that power of attorney freely
Yeah,
to
right.
anybody you don't, certainly unless you can absolutely trust them.
Yes.
And so armed with that power of attorney, there's a lot of things that they could do.
Mm-hmm.
And banks generally will scrutinize every power of attorney document very
Mhm.
carefully.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a state law passed last year that almost requires a bank to accept any power of attorney. So again, we will continue to scrutinize it.
So say that again. The legislature actually passed a law that says that banks have to accept an application for a trust.
They have to accept a power of attorney.
They have to accept a
Yes.
power of attorney. Okay. Okay. Is that because then that relieves them of liability because the power of attorney is a scammer or fraud? No. What was the purpose behind that? What was the legislative intent? Well,
I think part of it is that perhaps banks have been so diligent about scanning the legitimacy of the power of attorney.
Well, the scammers must have a lobby that lobbies the legislature, okay, that says that you have to accept the power of attorney regardless of who it is, as long as it's a piece of paper that's handed to you and somebody
Right.
produces
Right.
an ID
So-
card.
And, you know, it's very difficult on the part of the bank. So,
Mhm.
you know, before I became the commissioner, I did work as an attorney for one of the banks. And we did scrutinize all of the powers of attorneys. We didn't accept all of them. Some of them did not look real.
So if you run into that kind of situation today, even with this legislation in place, there's gotta be some recourse. No?
No.
No, it's absolute.
Well, we will make every attempt. Often, well, I don't know how often it is. We might have a customer, a longtime customer, walk up to the teller window with his or her caregiver with it,
Mm-hmm.
and they want to withdraw large sums of money.
Yeah, yeah.
And whether, you know, it could be a power of attorney situation, or it could be just the customer and the caregiver. And the bank tellers, many of whom know their customers very, very well, especially if you've been a customer for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
tellers get to know you.
Sure.
And if you never withdraw large sums of money, and all of a sudden you want to withdraw a large sum of money, they will question it, and they will attempt to persuade you not to do it.
But again, they don't accrue a liability if they accept. I mean, obviously, they because of the legislation in place, they have to go through the transaction if the person is in fact saying, yes, I want this to occur.
Right.
Okay.
Despite our best efforts, after all, it is their money,
Mm-hmm.
and they're free to do whatever they want with it.
Yeah.
But we want to help as much as we can,
Mm-hmm.
make them really think twice about what they're doing.
Okay.
And unfortunately, even after you suggest to them that this may not be in your best interest, they'll continue to do it.